Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Tom Keene, along with Paul Sweeney. Join us each day for insight from the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app. Within this crisis that we see of violence and assassination attempt, we are drawing upon our great historians. And if I can paint this picture from Watergate in a book that was issued in my youth, Paul, Arthur Schlesinger did a book called The Imperial Presidency. It was hugely successful. Even his detractors had to read it. Going back, Paul, to James K. Polk and the stunning advancement of the presidency that we saw in the Mexican War, and then on to the uproar of Watergate. And then it's the toughest thing to do, to take a classic book like that and follow up with a sequel that was successful. Andy Rudalevige joins from Bowdoin, who had the courage to take on the imperial presidency with his classic, The New Imperial Presidency. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. With the shock of this assassination attempt, what does the next imperial presidency look like?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, the shape of presidential behavior is going to still depend on who gets elected in November. I think, we can agree probably that the former president will get a political boost out of the week's events. But it is an institution that has just gotten stronger over time, partly because it has taken power, been ambitious in making claims about its own authority, and partly because Congress has tended to delegate a lot to it, right? They've kind of backed out of their own responsibilities in a lot of cases, and the president has stepped in. Whoever wins, I expect a more powerful president to continue. With
you as a true expert on this, can you imagine a Trump-Haley tandem? I mean, I think of Nixon-Agnew. I'm going to suggest they didn't get along, but can Trump-Haley occur in the Rudalevige mind?
I think it's unlikely, to be honest. There is one scenario. Let me circle back to it. I mean, So Nixon, picked Agnew sort of out of obscurity. Agnew was the governor of Maryland. He had impressed Nixon by being really tough on anti-war demonstrators during Vietnam. And it turned out that Agnew had not been vetted very well. He, of course, winds up having to resign because he took bribes, everywhere from being county executive up to being vice president. No. Piles of cash in paper bags on the desk of the vice president, right? So whenever we think we've seen something bad now, worse things have happened. Anyway, but with Trump and Haley, it's interesting because Haley, of course, wasn't even going to speak at the convention until a few days ago. She was his last, sort of standing competitor in the primary race, and they exchanged words, right? He attacked her, he attacked her husband, who was serving abroad in the military. She said he was, unfit, that he too was old and decrepit, bad as Biden in some ways, which is fighting words, of course, in the Republican Party. And so, it would be a shock to the system, I think. It's just very interesting to see how Trump will decide whether he needs to reset his campaign a little bit. I mean, J.D. Vance has gotten all the talk, right? And he's, of course, went on the attack immediately after the assassination attempt, effectively blamed the Democrats for it. Haley would be a different kind of pick, a more unifying pick, but does she want it, right? Does she want her star tied to President Trump, who,
in the speech rewrite, Paul, maybe we can get President Trump to say nattering nabobs of negativism.
Exactly.
We can see that.
So, Professor, Tom was referring to the imperial presidency, and we've seen claims by former President Trump that if he is reelected, that perhaps he will take that to a new level. How would you envision a second Trump presidency here, given that the odds from a lot of folks this morning are a little bit higher?
Yeah, well, he's made no secret about his desire to sort of make the executive branch a better instrument of his own will, right? I think he was frustrated in his first term. He kind of came in, of course, to office without any background of public service, didn't have a lot of people that he knew well as loyalists that he could appoint to various places. As we come, 9 years later from his first appointment, his first announcement back in 2015, he knows a lot more people. He has a better network of loyalists. He's got people he could put into office. And so, he's been talking about trying to bring the independent agencies, the regulatory agencies, better under his will. He's talked about using sort of a quirk in the civil service code to effectively fire a whole bunch of civil servants, maybe as many as 50,000 civil servants, and to put political appointees in their place to make, those spots, less based on expertise and more based on loyalty to President Trump. And if we want to go back to the imperial presidency, that was a big part of what Schlesinger is writing about. The idea that there is not a check, even within the executive branch on the president. And when we add into that the president's stated desire to make the Justice Department an instrument of his, quote, retribution, unquote, this is what begins to get people nervous.
President Biden, what do you believe his response will be in the coming days and weeks here?
Yeah, well, I think it was appropriate for him to, obviously to denounce the assassination attempt, but also to reach out to call the former president to, speak a couple times now to a national audience about the problematic use of political violence and polarization. From Biden's point of view, of course, he wants to be able to focus, though, on the divisiveness of Trump. It's going to be hard, I think, for Team Biden to attack Trump as a person. I suppose the Republican National Convention this week, by putting Republican policies first and foremost, do offer a potential target, I guess, for the Biden administration so that they can, be sympathetic to, the former president as a victim of violence, but also, continue on the offensive to some degree.
Professor Rudalevige, thank you so much. At Bowdoin University is classic, the new imperial presidency. Andy Rudalevige. The excellence of our analysis of the ramifications for Washington of this assassination attempt has been the wonderful perspective of Henrietta Treyz with Veda Partners. She was really quite something yesterday, and we're thrilled she could revisit this morning as well. Henrietta, I've got to go narrow, as I just did with Joe Matthew. The amendment in Milwaukee is the former governor of South Carolina will darken the door. Will they listen? Will the great and worthy of the Trump future listen to Nikki Haley?
I heard your last segment. I think that's the penultimate question. Nikki Haley was able to get a huge swath of just a few weeks back, 22%, if I remember correctly. That was your suburban, female, married, educated, white voter. That is the difference between Trump most likely being ahead to lock on this election.
But the heart of the matter is, as Joe Matthew always put out and you're expert on, is presidents and vice presidents don't necessarily have to get along. That's what I learned when I read Wendy Schiller's textbook 40 years ago. It's okay that the vice president's not on the same page as the president. That's business as usual, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think people perpetually are overestimating, particularly in this day and age, how important the vice president is. It used to be that the geographic basket of voters that he or she could bring to the table was really all that you wanted. So when you hear about, a potential Kamala Harris campaign, would she pick, the governor of Pennsylvania who performed so ably this weekend? That makes sense if you're gunning for Pennsylvania. With this situation, I think what I really struggle with, and I don't see it happening, is mostly because I think there's a lot of consternation within the campaign between Trump and Haley camps. So I think the actual campaign folks, I think a lot of Trump supporters do not want to see Nikki Haley on the ticket, and that's what's going to prevent her, not any of their ideological differences.
All right, so Henrietta, with a little bit of hindsight here, how important or how impactful were the events from this weekend on the Trump candidacy here? Some folks are saying this just created a lopsided victory for the former president. Are you in that camp?
I think that we've already had 2 June and July surprises, and I don't even know what's coming in October. That's usually what we wait for. So I think it's extraordinary that anything was able to knock the Biden versus Kamala Harris dynamic off of the front page news. I didn't anticipate that would be possible, and now here we are. So I think there's a long way to go. It's been 48 hours of everybody saying kumbaya, let's have a unity moment. We'll see if the former president can carry that through the convention. I do think that what's going to come our way, though, is a sequence of bounces that should benefit the former president, Trump, and really serve as a further deteriorator for Joe Biden. So any candidate going into a convention should expect a 3 or 4 point bump. We were expecting the polls that came out this weekend showing effectively Trump and Biden tied to show something different, to show Trump surging ahead, 2-3 points. That did not materialize. So what we have is a really divided public. And I don't know that if the unity message is going to carry through or if the chaos message is going to carry through. I mean, this is an assassination attempt. We were still learning all the details, but that fraught dynamic is not something that I think most Americans want, which is why Trump has not pulled ahead, even with all the weaknesses of Joe Biden. So I think there's a long way to go.
Henrietta, out on YouTube, on our live chat, really informed and smart, someone goes right back to the former governor of California and the fancy guy from Houston and Yale, George Bush Sr. I mean, just as a model here of what a Republican convention be like, Reagan and Bush Sr., that in itself was a shock, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think you could see that shock. I mean, it makes perfect electoral sense. If your biggest downfall and the widest gap in polling right now is with women, I'm not trying to imply that women vote for women. We have seen that is not true. But Trump has a serious gender gap. It's the largest that we've seen in years. And I think that Nikki Haley would go a long way where J.D. Vance has no shot. You always want to bring Ohio with you, but Trump is ahead by 9-10 points there. You don't need J.D. Vance to shoot additional shots in the arm on Ohio. You do need something different. I think the gender gap is a big issue for Trump, and I think Nikki Haley makes a lot of sense.
What do you think the Democratic Party is doing today, President Biden and the campaign are doing today and in the days ahead?
I mean, look, I went out on a pretty heavy limb a couple weeks back and said, with very high odds in the range of 70%, that Biden was not going to be the nominee. And the way that I see this race shaping up, both with Nikki Haley and with everybody else waiting in the wings, is a lot of attention from everybody not named Biden and Trump is on 2028 right now. So the next steps are really going to be who decides to throw their hat in the ring and get involved here. I think Kamala Harris is the only person who can replace Biden on the ticket. And I think that those conversations have been put on the back burner. Difference of opinion in D.C. is as disparate as I've ever seen. The people that I trust most are saying, 15% odds at best that Biden gets off the ticket. But in what I'm seeing from donors, from the voters, and from the forecasting saying, we just don't see a path ahead. Biden has to get off.
Henrietta, how about a question like away from the politics of the moment? The market's up today, and off of Greg Villier's essay on landslide, how does the betting on tax policy fold into our enthusiasm of the market?
Well, I think that really belies a lack of understanding of what it takes to turn a tax bill into law. You need 51 votes in the Senate. If Greg Villier's note is right and it's a landslide, then you're talking maybe 55, 56 Senate seats. It makes it easier to lose a couple votes. It would make maintaining the SALT cap, for example, probably a lot easier. You need that $1.2 trillion revenue raiser to offset the cost of the rest of the bill. So certain things would be easier, but without 60 votes, without a supermajority, it doesn't make a difference. You're still not passing an immigration reform bill. That means you still need to enact anything via tariffs. And the tax bill is going to be partisan. It will not have bipartisan support.
Henrietta, thank you so much for the perspective. It's really treasured. Henrietta Treyz, huge value to us with Veda Partners. Michael Purves from up where the moose live. He's up in New Hampshire.
Wow.
I mean, the deer fly up there. They're like B-52 bombers at Camp Drum over in New York. Michael Purves, I really just would like to talk about the extension of this great bull market. Is that when the first leaves change in your New Hampshire?
Yeah, I think I think that the market is extraordinarily resilient right now. I've talked about, I was at 5,400 for the S&P 500 from last December. I've talked about 6,000 being a realistic number to get to this year. We may even get past that. There, it's just, you have a few things. There's obviously a lot going on politically and geopolitically, but I think right now you're looking at basically the Fed has pivoted from a hawking stance to some sort of easing stance. We'll see what that really means, but it's certainly not it's certainly not a hiking stance. And you've got fantastic earnings, and you've got the rally, unlike so many rallies we've had over the last 12, 13 years, is really an earnings driven rally, right? So if the earnings are growing in one particular sector group, it's going to go up. And if it's going up higher in another sector group, it's going to go up even more. I mean, so it's a very healthy, fundamentally driven rally, as opposed to, let's get some PE expansion because the Fed's going to take interest rates down 200 basis points, as we saw, before COVID and during the earlier part of COVID.
Michael, how concerned are you about the concentration of performance in this market, and with just a handful of stocks? And if you kind of look out beyond that, there's really not much performance at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a great question. I think the reality is that you've got the Mag 6, sometimes the Mag 7, depending on the day. There are fantastic earnings growth and fantastic returns, right? You've actually had PE compression in the Mag 6 this year. And if you look at the price earnings to growth ratios for the Mag 6, they are actually considerably more healthier than they are compared to, for example, the SPX equal weight index, right? So yeah, higher PEs, but much higher growth there. So again, that sort of says that if the Mag 6 are driving the overall equity returns, and it's a really fundamentally driven thing, I'm much less concerned about the breadth issue there. Look, the SPX equal weight is up on the year, and their earnings are up on the year. It's just a lot smaller there. So I'm not really bothered by the breadth issue the way the textbook sort of tells us we're supposed to be in this respect. I just think it's a very unusual market structure where you've got 6 companies that are effectively 40% of the market cap weighted S&P 500, and they're driving the bus, but the other ones are not. Not growing as fast, performing as well, but I sort of who cares, right? If you have,
So where outside of these Mag 6, 7 names do you see opportunities here?
That's the hard part, because everyone's been sort of rah rotation there. I think it's you can rotate out of some overheated names like NVIDIA and stuff like that. But just to blankly rotate into, say, like this, the IWM, the small caps, or to the SPX equal weight, I'm not sure is a good strategy. I think the sectors that I particularly like, I think, continue to be in the metal space. I think there's opportunities in energy, and the beleaguered banking sector, sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of industry groups and for so many years, that's I think that's a place where I think we're going to start seeing some better returns there. But again, these rotations into these value and cyclical parts, you have to be sort of a nimble trader. It's not. I think you have to be very careful about your entry and exit points. If you had to put a gun to my head and say, okay, I can only buy one group of stocks for the next 3 years, I can't trade them. It's going to be the Mag 6.
Okay, well, this is right where I wanted to go. I mean, the bottom line is people, even if they're participating in this lift in the market, we're all sort of shell-shocked because we can't remember an extended bull market like this. What is the Purves strategy for someone that has a 3-year perspective? You just said it. It's continue to buy Apple and the rest, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think you need to be allocated to equities, and I think you need to be allocated to where you're seeing the most probable earnings growth. And let's not forget, these giant tech companies have fantastic balance sheets that affords them the ability to do more stock buybacks. They're not as vulnerable to the economic vicissitudes. They have most of them have fantastic overseas exposure as well. So they're really fantastic business models that are, I think, with the AI theme, are going to be the most obvious beneficiaries of whatever happens in AI. I do think you have to be careful. Because they're so loved, they get overloved at times, and they get over. You can see the technicals, the RSIs on this getting overstretched, and then you can use those as tactical sell periods. But again, these are tactical short-term things. The broader trend here is that these stocks are going to outperform the broader index.
And for those of you not on YouTube, I mean, we got the casual Purves.
Sure.
He looks like the keyboard player for the Dead. Michael, you're up in New Hampshire. Okay, you're up in New Hampshire. And let's be honest here. Which canoe are you using this summer? Are you using the Merrimack canoe? 5,000 large, it's sort of holistic and nice, or do you got the old LL Bean aluminum going?
Tom, you're a New Englander. You should know better. The Old Town, Wooden Canvas Old Town is where you want to go.
You're doing it's like a John McPhee novel.
The survival of the bark canoe.
Yeah, the birch bark canoe. I mean, this guy's so granola. How many mosquito bites do you have now underneath the blazer you put on for 6 minutes?
We got up here Saturday, and I don't know. I've dozens, shall we say? But
dozens, shall we say? Michael Purves, thank you so much. Use the neatsfoot oil, and if that doesn't work, just spray some. Put some Budweiser on you. The mosquitoes won't hit you. Michael Purves, thank you so much. This is our conversation of the day on an assassination attempt of Donald Trump. Robert D. Kaplan is absolutely definitive. The arch answer is the geography of our international relations. It's widely understood that his book of the year last year, stretching from Morocco over to the various stands. But there's another book, which is the book to read if you're shaken by violence in America, The Tragic Mind. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. I want to talk about a single half sentence in your book, The Semblance of Order. Have we lost our semblance of order?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. We're losing it, as I would say. That's where we are. But keep in mind, historically, America is a very young democracy. Only 250 years old, 1/3 of the time of the Moorish occupation of Spain, and it has been very tumultuous. We have had 4 successful presidential assassinations, remember. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. And we've had several other attempted assassinations of presidents and former presidents. So this is not completely unusual in American history. So I would ask people to calm down. I mean, a mass democracy is by definition tumultuous, especially in a social media age.
And Robert, a lot of folks were saying, boy, the divisions in this country over the last, 4, 5, 6 years, whatever time period you want to say, boy, seem as bad or maybe even worse than the 60s. But I remember, in the 60s, again, as you know, assassinations were just much more frequent and much more problematic than we've had here. I'm not sure if this weekend changed that.
No. I do not know either. Keep one thing in mind, though, historically speaking. Assassinations are very tragic affairs in this sense. Had Kennedy not been assassinated, given his thinking up until that point, he was becoming more and more skeptical of our involvement in Vietnam. We may not have had the Vietnam War with 500,000 troops deployed as we did, and with it, all the divisions that it caused in American society for decades afterwards. It really did move history on a different pivot. by moving from Kennedy, who is a genuine war hero and expert in foreign policy, to Johnson, who is a neophyte in foreign policy. So success, without the Lincoln assassination, civil rights might have come 50 years sooner. So these are big things.
Right. So social media, you mentioned it earlier, Robert. What role does that play? And is there any defense against that dissemination of information and misinformation?
Well, a print and typewriter age was about moderation, because you had to argue out complex issues at length with fact checking. So it enabled moderation. Social media enables the extremes. It's about passion and shortness. And passion and shortness are the enemy of analysis. So social media is one of the main drivers behind the polarization in the country, behind both political parties moving further to their own extremes. It's harder and harder to keep a mass democracy at peace in a social media age.
Robert T. Kaplan, we were talking yesterday in our special coverage of any number of presidential pairings, and one of them we came up with was Nixon and Spiro Agnew, the governor of Maryland at the time, completely obscure as well. And there was an idea of a silent majority. Does Robert D. Kaplan discern a silent majority in America today?
Yes, I do. It's not large in a numerical sense, but it's large in an electoral pivotal sense. Because we're so divided, there are only about 5 or 6 swing states now. There used to be a dozen, because the other states, the other 45 states or so, are all already spoken for to a significant extent. So even though we're increasingly divided, it's going to be silent swing voters, maybe totaling 100, 200,000 in those 5 states that are going to determine the election.
Do you have any idea, I'm thinking of your blistering essay in the Washington Post about Trump foreign policy and the Trump reach across the Pacific to China. Will this assassination attempt give us a new Donald Trump? Do you have any wisdom on that?
No, not really. Trump is he's a character out of Shakespeare, even if he's never read Shakespeare. But I don't know. He's pretty aggressive towards China. And keep in mind that the actions between the U.S. and the Chinese are getting more and more aggressive. And that is dangerous, because this is what happened before the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was only after the Cuban Missile Crisis, after both superpowers stared into the abyss, that they went on to have détente and strategic arms limitation treaties and all of that stuff. So what we need is a real cooling of relations between the U.S. and China. I mean, cooling down the rhetoric.
People ask me what I'm going to read. I'll tell you what I'm going to read next. I got a stack of books going on right now, and off of this assassination attempt, Paul Sweeney, I have to pull an Audible, surveillance Audible. The Tragic Mind, Fear, Fate, and the Burden of Power. Robert T. Kaplan, Yale University Press. It is definitive back to the Greeks and Romans on violence and tragedy of our interesting politics. Robert T. Kaplan, thank you so much for joining us. This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.